So I'm going to talk about a very difficult fungus to manage in clinical practice. The word that I use that it is very difficult fungus, the reason is manifold. One is that once the invasive mucormycosis occurs, that means that once the fungus enters into the blood vessels or the angioinvasion occurs, then there will be rapid disseminations of the fungus to the organs and the surrounding structures. And that leads to the increase in the morbidity as well as into the mortality. So even though like you have identified, you have make a diagnosis early and started treating a patient who has evidence of angioinvasion, the outcome is not good for this patient also, and the mortality can be up to 30 to 80% depending on the host factor. Right. So if your host is having a malignancy, patient host is having post HSCT or neutropenia, then the mortality is very high compared to those patient who has invasive mucormycosis with relatively stable immune system or patient with normal immunocompetent status like the victims of road traffic accidents or tsunami or some others. There are various species which are responsible for the mucormycosis, and the most common one would be the Rhizopus erizus, which is most commonly isolated in Indian patients. But there are several other species, right, which is also responsible for the same syndrome which we called as mucormycosis. And some of the species like Cunninghamella, Succiniana, Apophysomyces, these are the species where the MIC for amphotericin B is very high, meaning that probably you may get an inferior response to the first line of choice, that is amphotericin B. Now, this is what the new publication, One World, One Guideline on treatment of mucormycosis, published in this month in Lancet Infectious Disease. So I'm going to take help from this guideline also, and we'll see how we can manage. So we all know the risk factors for mucormycosis, and the most important risk factors in India is diabetes mellitus. So uncontrolled diabetes and the complications of diabetes like diabetic ketoacidosis, these are the two very important clinical conditions which favors mucormycosis in India. And there are several other risk factors, and we all know these risk factors for mucormycosis. Out of all these things, the iron overload and the defroxamine therapy is now no longer, being important risk factors in for mucormycosis. The reason is that we are not using this defroxamine, and the iron overload can be taken care by the many other oral chelating iron agents. There are outbreaks of mucormycosis in hospitals, so nosocomial transmission of mucormycosis been described well into the literature. And the most common source for nosocomial mucormycosis would be a wooden tongue depressor or the wooden spatula, adhesive tapes, ECG leads. I mean, these are the very common where patient can get mucormycosis from the hospital. Mucormycosis can be described or divided into the according to the site involved by the mucormycosis. So the most common site that we see in diabetic patient would be rhinoorbital cerebral mucormycosis, or in short term we called as ROCM. Pulmonary mucormycosis, where the lung is the primary target organ being involved with mucormycosis, and so on. So you can see that practically almost all the organ system, including dissemination with mucormycosis, is possible in a patient with immunocompromised status. The most the unusual features of mucormycosis would be, and especially it is described from the Indian patients and from China also, and that is isolated renal mucormycosis, where patient is not having any other foci of mucormycosis, and patient presented to a clinic with features of pyelonephritis and the fever, and found to have isolated renal mucormycosis. So how do we diagnose mucormycosis? So whenever you have immunocompromised host like hematology or diabetes, and when you are looking at deep organ involvement like sinus, patient is having facial pain or the pulmonary disease or some abdominal issues and suspecting mucormycosis, then the imagings are the best tool to assess this patient as a first choice. And from imaging, probably you will be able to judge the area of involvement like paranasal sinus or the orbital apex or going into the intracranial structure. So this is how you can assess your patients. And from involved area, you have to get a tissue sampling. So you have to do a diagnostic biopsy from that. And from diagnostic biopsy, you can get a clue from a direct microscopic examination. You can go for a culture and then identify the species, as well as you can go for a drug susceptibility testing and histopathology. And you can also use newer techniques like immunohistochemistry to make a diagnosis or to differentiate aspergillus from mucormycosis into the tissue. And from direct sample examination, you can also straight away run a molecular techniques to know the species identification of that particular fungi. But if you have a superficial disease, especially when road traffic accident or contaminated wounds, which gives you a skin and soft tissue mucormycosis, then you have to look at the clinical examination. At the most, you can go for a local ultrasound examination to know the extent and the involvement of the muscles and the subcutaneous tissues. You can also look at the eschar and get a biopsy and run all sets of tests. Biomarkers like beta-glucan and the galactomannan are very important here, especially when your host is hematological malignancy, post-transplant, solid or the hematological transplant. Because if you can demonstrate that the BDG and the galactomannans are negative, then the chances of other fungi is very important, right? So you have ruled out the aspergillus infection because there is galactomannan is negative and the BDG is negative, so you also look for the other fungi. The reason is that mucormycosis do not produces galactomannan, and Rhizopus erizus can have some beta-glucan. So most of the time when somebody is having mucor infection, you have a negative galactomannan and negative beta-glucan. So this is a very common presentations of mucormycosis where the sinus is predominantly involved and it produces extensive infarction, necrosis and destruction of the tissue. Here you can see that palate is already destroyed and perforated. So orosinus fistula is there. And once you get a sample from direct microscopy, your microbiologist is able to show or the report that there is a broad aseptate folding like ribbon-like folding fungi is seen on the direct microscopy, and calcium floor examination is one of the other tool to make a diagnosis of mucormycosis, and the culture will give you the final species identification and the drug susceptibility testing. Histopathology is also very useful tool because in half of the patients, despite like you have sent a biological sample for a culture, you may get a negative culture in case of mucormycosis. The reason is like if your microbiology lab has handled this sample, grind or crush it before processing for culture, then this posiseptate or aseptate fungi will unable to grow and produces negative or the sterile culture. But on histopathological examination, again, you can get a standard, the fungal invading into the tissue by almost all the stain. So from HNE stain to Giemsa stain to a PAS stain, right? So you can easily demonstrate this fungus into the tissue. Again, the characteristic is same. It is broad, ribbon-like, folded, thin wall, primary aseptate fungus which has got 90-degree branching, right? So it is very easy to identify into the tissue. When you are evaluating your patient with radiological assessment, then in a pulmonary mucormycosis, what the important features that you can see is that big thick wall cavitary lesions with the reverse halo pattern. Here you can see that there is elements of ground glass within the cavity, and this is a thick wall cavity, right? So, but from these radiological features, we cannot 100% say that this is a pulmonary mucormycosis because these are the characteristics lesions that you can see with the pulmonary mucormycosis, but these are not specific for mucor. It can be seen with some other conditions like nocardiasis, or the patient with rhodococcus infection can have thick wall cavitary lesions in pulmonary system. The another important radiological features that you can see on the CT scan examination would be the vessel occlusion. So if you are doing a CT scan along with the pulmonary angiography, you will be able to show the blockade of the vessels, and at the edge of here it is not seen, so don't look at this CT scan. But it is very characteristic that there is some angioinvasive process is going on, which leads to the pulmonary infarction and cavitary lesions. So once you have a pulmonary lesions, the diagnosis can be arrived by either bronchoscopic biopsy or CT guided biopsy from that particular lesion, and that can give you identification of the fungus. This is one of my patient with diabetes who had insect bite over the abdomen, and then it has spread rapidly, and it was because of the mucormycosis. And this was Apophysomyces species, which produces these devastating lesions and requires extensive surgical debridement and then plastic surgery. So this is what we have discussed, that there are no biomarkers available for making a diagnosis and for mucormycosis. So how do we treat? The most important when you are dealing with mucormycosis, that clinicians need to understand that this is a medical emergency. So you need to act fast. So whenever you have clinical suspicion, you have to start working on making a diagnosis and starting first dose of antifungal, that is amphotericin, as soon as possible. The reason is that this is rapidly progressive and destructive lesions because of the angioinvasions. And if you delay in making a diagnosis or in initiating therapy, it will lead to, or it contributes to the increased morbidity as well as the mortality. And remember that it is not you alone or the clinician alone is able to take care of this mucormycosis. It should be a team approach. So this team includes, if you have a rhinoorbital cerebral mucormycosis, then the ENT surgeon, plastic surgeons, radiologists, pathologists, and microbiologists apart from you. So all of you have to work together to make a diagnosis and subsequent surgical debridement and surgical therapy, right? So it should be a team approach rather than the clinician working alone for the treatment of mucormycosis. And the another thing that we need to understand, that mucormycosis is not only a medical problem, it is surgical issue also. So we need to involve surgeon to debride the involved area with mucormycosis repeatedly or with radical surgery with adequately to achieve a successful cure or the eradication of the fungus from the patient. So if you are unable to do adequate debridement, then what will happen? In dead necrotic area, the fungus survives. The drug is not going to penetrate into the necrotic area, whether it is in the lung or whether it is in the sinuses or any other area of the body. Right? So we need to do adequate debridement, which will allow the penetrations of antifungal drugs into the area. So early complete surgical treatment of mucormycosis, whenever possible, it is strongly recommended by this guideline. And when the complete debridement or the complete excision is not possible, then probably in case of sinus mucormycosis, you can go for repeated sinoscopic debridement of this area. The amphotericin deoxycholate has been drug of choice for decades, but because we know the limitations and the toxicities associated with amphotericin B, liposomal amphotericin B is now preferred for treatment of mucormycosis. There are no definitive data which supports the use of combination therapy, because we have seen many clinicians, they combine amphotericin plus posaconazole for treatment of mucormycosis, but we do not have sufficient evidence to guide that combination therapy is superior to liposomal amphotericin B therapy alone. But when you use a combination therapy for treatment of mucormycosis, then it will add to the cost because both the drugs are very expensive. It will add to the toxicities and probably you end up with some drug-drug interactions, right? So it is always preferred to use amphotericin monotherapy as a part of induction therapy in a patient with mucormycosis along with surgical therapy. And the dosage recommendation for liposomal amphotericin B is higher. Generally, we use at 3 to 5 milligram per kg, but current guideline recommends that we have to use 5 to 10 milligram of per kg of liposomal amphotericin B for treatment of mucormycosis, and it is a strong recommendation. The most important thing that we should understand that many times clinicians, they do escalate the dose. So they start by lower dosage, and every day they step up the dose till they reach to the calculated dose of amphotericin B, that is 5 to 10 milligram per kg. So this practice should be avoided. You should start the calculated dose from day one. So if your patient is 60 kg and requires 600 milligram of liposomal amphotericin B, or if you are giving 5 milligram per kg and 300 milligram of liposomal amphotericin B, it should be started from day one, right? So never ever slowly step up or slowly escalate the dose to reach the calculated dose over a period of days to weeks. So whenever you end up with some renal toxicity when you are using deoxycholate or liposomal amphotericin B, you can actually discontinue therapy. So if your creatinine has jumped to 2.8 milligram, then you can actually give a break. So you can stop the amphotericin B therapy for few days and repeat the electrolytes and the creatinine. Once it returns to a normal, you can safely restart the calculated dose of amphotericin B, right? And if you are using a higher dose, like 10 milligram per kg, then it is good idea to step down to 5 milligram per kg initially when there is a rising trends in the creatinine rather than discontinuation. So if you are using higher dose, step down to 5 milligram per kg, and with 5 milligram per kg, if you have rising creatinine level, please stop therapy, monitor this patient closely, and over a couple of days, like once creatinine returns to a normal, safely restart the calculated dose. The isavuconazole again has a good activity, though there are no head-to-head comparisons. It has been compared with the Fungiscope data, that is retrospective cohort. So, isavuconazole has been found to be having effect on mucormycosis in clinical data set. Posaconazole delayed releasing tablet is also very good because of the pharmacokinetics, and it has got in vitro susceptibility to most of the mucor species. Intravenous therapy, again, I told you about the limitations, and both these agents have a moderate recommendation by the current guideline. This is a European guidelines recommending the same thing, that amphotericin B intolerant patient, you can go for either posaconazole or isavuconazole, and the recommendation is almost same. In current global guideline, the isavuconazole is strongly supported as a salvage therapy, right? So those patients who has not responded or partially responded, or patient is having intolerance to amphotericin B, here you can go for isavuconazole therapy. And the POSA delayed releasing tablet or POSA IV has the same quality recommendation. So these are the optimal treatment pathways which has been shown in the current mucormycosis guideline. So in suspected and confirmed cases, you have to treat this as a medical emergency and you have to give urgent attention, right? Do a diagnostic workup, so biopsy or the surgical debridement or debulking the lesions, get the tissue, make a confirmed diagnosis, and initiate antifungal therapy, that is liposomal amphotericin B, which is a preferred agent. And you can use isavuconazole, posaconazole is a moderate quality evidence. Then you have to assess the response every few weekly, right? So generally I start assessing my patients with radiological evaluation at 3 to 6 week time. So if you found that patient is having a stable or patient is having a partial response with the first assessment, continue the same. And if patient is much stable and you could do a complete debridement, you can step down to oral therapy, that is oral isavuconazole or the posaconazole delayed releasing tablet. But if somebody is having a progressive disease with your first radiological assessment, because clinical assessment you are going to perform daily. So when somebody is showing a progressive disease, then again, you need to go for another therapy, because the patients on standard first line recommended therapy, you need to first reconfirm a diagnosis and find out from a drug susceptibility testing whether patient is having higher MIC for amphotericin or something like this. So here you can go for a combination therapy. So you can continue with your liposomal amphotericin B therapy and add either isavuconazole or posaconazole depending on the availability. And again, you start monitoring your patient. Here also, like, surgical debridement is very important because this progressions is mainly because of the angio invasion. So you need to excise. So in dead tissue, this drug, how long you are using is not going to penetrate. So adequate surgical resection or debridement is utmost important. And when somebody develops toxicity to your amphotericin B, we know that how to manage amphotoxicity, and you can step down to oral versions later on. Now, another important question, like how long, right? Because we do not have a good answer, how long I'm going to continue with antifungal therapy. So the exact duration is not known or not described well. There is no definite answer. But there are few factors which includes clinical, radiological, and if possible, mycological. But mainly like clinical and radiological parameters are very important in making a decision of discontinuation of antifungal therapy. The first of all is that whether you have taken care of the predisposing conditions like controlling diabetes, reversing the diabetic ketoacidosis, or reducing immunosuppression when somebody is on immunosuppressive therapy, or controlling neutropenia, right? So if your host factor has been taken care of adequately or not, and there is no evidence of clinical progressions by radiological assessment, and if you are able to perform a complete surgical debridement. So these are the factors which leads to a shorter duration of therapy for mucormycosis, and there are cases that the patients may require therapy for months together, right? So generally speaking, weeks to months of therapy are given for a patient, but these are the very important factor: thorough surgical debridement or complete the debridement of the necrotic area, and reversibility of the predisposing conditions. So if you can achieve this, then probably patients can qualify for shortened duration of therapy. And therapy is generally to be continued until the resolution of the signs and symptoms and marked radiological improvement. There are some adjunct therapy that you can use for treatment of mucormycosis apart from your antifungal and surgical therapy. One is iron chelator. The deferasirox been studied into animal model and found to be very effective, but it has not shown the similar efficacy in hematological patient setting in a defeat mucor study. There are several limitations of that study, so we are not going to discuss that. But in clinical practice, we found that deferasirox probably is a helpful adjunct treatment in management of mucormycosis. The other thing that you can use is growth factors like GCSF when patient is having neutropenia. So GCSF will improve the numbers as well as the functions of the neutrophils, and it will help to take care of replicating the mucor and probably prevent the further angio invasion, because neutrophils are a key component which can limit the blood vessels invasions by mycelial fungus, including mucormycosis. So GCSF is a very good adjunct therapy, especially in hematological patients with neutropenia and hyperbaric oxygen. I think this is again a very useful treatment along with your antifungal and surgical debridement, especially when somebody is having skin and soft tissue mucormycosis. So mortality is very high. I told you in the beginning, it is 40 to 80%, and it all depends on the host factor. And if your host is having malignancy or neutropenia, the mortality is very high. And for those immunocompetent patients who develop mucormycosis as a part of road traffic accident and other stuff, they do have a good prognosis. So my take on mucormycosis, it is very difficult to treat, very expensive treatment. There are medical factors apart from these, the social factors. The lab diagnosis, the culture is negative in half of the patients. Dissemination of disease is not uncommon, so sometimes you may miss the spread of mucormycosis to the other organ. The fungus is very virulent, and it has got a capacity to invade the blood vessels, and it produces unpredictable dissemination. And I remember before 3 to 4 months, like we were treating rhinoorbital mucormycosis, and patient was having diabetes, and patient was very stable. We did a nice surgical debridement and everything was fine. And patient has almost completed 6 weeks of liposomal amphotericin B. She was stable. And suddenly she developed CV stroke. And we found that it was not associated with mucormycosis, but it was because of her comorbid conditions. But ultimately, like patient will end up in the morbidity, and she died later on because of the CV stroke related stuff, right? So not only the primary infections, but other comorbid conditions may also complicate the clinical course of your patients. The control of diabetes and the reversal of ketoacidosis is very important. And if you can reduce the immunosuppressions, especially steroid, which is extremely helpful in taking care of mucormycosis. Antifungals, we know that liposomal amphotericin is drug of choice. And for deep organ disseminated when surgery is not possible, you have to continue with your antifungal for a prolonged time, probably indefinite. And adjunct therapy with deferracirose and hyperbaric oxygen probably is helpful in some of the patients. Thank you very much for the patients listening.